When your own sister looks you dead in the eye at a crowded brunch table and tells you to get a life, there's a special kind of pain that cuts deeper than any stranger's insult ever could. But when that same sister discovers you're actually the one signing her paychecks, well, that's when everything you thought you knew about family power dynamics gets turned completely upside down. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and for 32 years, I've lived in the shadow of my younger sister, Sarah's expectations about who I should be. According to the latest research on family dynamics, 89% of adults report experiencing some form of sibling rivalry that extends well into their professional lives. But what happens when the unsuccessful sibling is actually the one holding all the cards? What happens when years of careful privacy collide with public humiliation in the most spectacular way possible? This is the story of how one brunch celebration became the moment everything changed, how a sister who spent decades dismissing my achievements suddenly realized she'd been working for me all along, and why sometimes the most powerful response to mockery isn't revenge, it's simply revealing the truth. Growing up, Sarah was always the golden child. While I spent my teenage years buried in business books and working part-time jobs, she was winning popularity contests and dating the quarterback. Our parents' dinner conversations revolved around Sarah's social victories, while my academic achievements barely warranted a mention. It was like living in a house where only one person's success counted, and that person definitely wasn't me. The pattern started early and never really stopped. When Sarah got into her dream college, it was a family celebration, with dinner reservations and photo sessions. When I earned a full scholarship to business school, Mom mentioned it in passing while discussing Sarah's sorority rush. When Sarah landed her first job at a marketing firm, Dad couldn't stop bragging to the neighbors. When I started my consulting business, they asked when I was going to get a real job. But here's what I learned about sibling dynamics that most people never realize. Sometimes being the overlooked one is actually the greatest gift you can receive. While Sarah was busy performing for an audience, I was busy building something real. While she was collecting likes on social media, I was collecting clients and contracts. While she measured success in external validation, I was measuring it in profit margins and business growth. The psychology behind this runs deeper than most people understand. According to research on family systems, children often develop coping mechanisms based on their perceived role in the family hierarchy. Sarah learned that her worth came from being seen, celebrated, and acknowledged. I learned that my worth came from what I could accomplish when nobody was watching. This dynamic created something I now recognize as strategic invisibility. I became exceptionally good at flying under the radar, at building success without fanfare, at achieving goals without requiring anyone else's approval or recognition. What Sarah saw as my failure to launch was actually my decision to launch quietly, powerfully, and on my own terms. But there was a cost to this approach. Every family gathering became an exercise in enduring subtle digs about my life choices. Every holiday dinner included pointed questions about when I'd settle down, get serious, or stop playing around with my little business ventures. Sarah's success became the family's shared pride, while my achievements remained largely invisible to everyone except my bank account. The breaking point had been building for years, but I didn't realize it until that sunny Saturday morning when everything came crashing down in the most public way possible. What my family didn't know, what I had deliberately kept hidden for over 5 years, was that my little consulting business had grown into something they couldn't have imagined. While they were tracking Sarah's promotions and celebrating her salary increases, I was quietly building a client base that included some of the most prestigious companies in our city. I had made a conscious decision early on to separate my personal and professional lives completely, not out of shame, but out of strategic necessity. I had watched too many entrepreneurs get sabotaged by family members who couldn't handle their success, had seen too many family dynamics poisoned by money and achievement comparisons. So I built my business behind a carefully constructed wall of privacy. Martinez Consulting specialized in digital transformation strategies for mid to large companies. My team of 12 employees worked with clients across multiple industries, helping them navigate technological changes and optimize their operations. We had a track record of increasing client efficiency by an average of 40% within the first year of engagement. Our client retention rate was 94%. Our revenue had grown 300% over the past 3 years. But at family dinners, I was still Rebecca who hasn't figured it out yet. This wasn't unusual. Research shows that many successful entrepreneurs, particularly women, deliberately downplay their achievements to family members who might not understand or support their career choices. The phenomenon is so common that business psychologists have a term for it: success camouflage. We hide our accomplishments behind modest language and deflecting comments because we've learned that family celebrations often come with a side of resentment, jealousy, or unwanted advice. I had become a master of success camouflage. When relatives asked what I did for work, I'd say something vague about helping companies with their computer systems. When they pressed for details about income, I'd redirect the conversation to Sarah's latest achievement. When they wondered why I could afford nice things, I'd credit careful budgeting and thrift store finds. Meanwhile, my business was thriving in ways that would have shocked them. We'd just signed a 6-figure contract with a Fortune 500 company. I was being invited to speak at industry conferences. Trade publications were featuring my strategies in cover stories. But as far as my family knew, I was still the directionless sister who couldn't get her act together. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Sarah's career was celebrated at every family gathering, mine was generating 10 times her annual income. While they worried about my future stability, I was building generational wealth. While they encouraged me to be more like Sarah, Sarah was unknowingly working in an ecosystem that I had helped create and maintain. But keeping this secret came with its own psychological toll. There's something exhausting about constantly diminishing your achievements, about pretending to struggle when you're actually thriving, about letting people worry about your future when your future is more secure than theirs. Success camouflage might protect you from family drama, but it also protects you from family pride, support, and genuine connection. I told myself I was avoiding complications, but I was also avoiding authenticity. And as I would soon learn, that choice was about to create the most complicated situation of all. The Grand Meridian Hotel's rooftop terrace was the kind of place Sarah loved. Upscale, Instagram-worthy, and perfect for making an impression. She had insisted on hosting her promotion celebration there. wanting to show off both her new position and her ability to afford such luxury. The irony that she was celebrating at a hotel where I had consulted on their digital renovation project wasn't lost on me, but I kept that detail to myself. I arrived fashionably on time, wearing what Sarah would later describe as my usual boring clothes. A simple black dress that actually cost more than her monthly car payment, but looked unremarkable enough to avoid questions. The celebration was already in full swing, with about 15 of Sarah's coworkers scattered around 2 pushed-together tables, mimosas flowing freely, and Sarah holding court at the center of attention. "Rebecca, Yapiam," she called out when she spotted me, her voice carrying that particular tone that I'd learned to recognize over the years, the one that meant she was about to perform our relationship for an audience. "Everyone, this is my older sister I was telling you about." I should have known from that introduction what was coming. Sarah had a habit of using me as a cautionary tale in her professional social circles, the sister who served as proof of her own good decision-making. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that she would sometimes share stories about my unconventional life choices as examples of what happens when you don't follow a traditional career path. The conversation flowed predictably at first. Sarah's coworkers were polite, asking the usual questions about what I did for work. I gave my standard vague responses about consulting and helping companies with their systems, but I could see Sarah watching me with that familiar expression, part pity, part frustration, part embarrassment. "So Rebecca is still figuring things out," Sarah announced to the table, her voice carrying across the terrace. "She's been doing this little consulting thing for a few years now, but you know how it is with these startup ideas." She laughed, the sound sharp in the morning air. I keep telling her she needs to get serious about her career, maybe look into working for an actual company instead of chasing these entrepreneurial dreams. Her colleagues shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded politely, others suddenly became very interested in their eggs Benedict. But Sarah was just getting started. "The thing is," she continued, warming to her theme, "some people are just dreamers, you know. They think they can skip all the hard work of climbing the corporate ladder and just create their own success." She gestured toward me with her mimosa glass. But real success takes real commitment to real companies with real structure. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came with these moments, the particular humiliation of being used as someone else's object lesson while sitting right there at the table. But there was something different this time. Maybe it was the setting. Maybe it was the audience of strangers. Maybe it was just the accumulation of 32 years of these interactions, finally reaching a breaking point. "I mean, look at her," Sarah continued, apparently oblivious to the growing discomfort around the table. Still wearing the same style clothes she wore in college, still living in that tiny apartment, still talking about her business like it's going to amount to something. It's actually kind of sad. That's when she turned to me directly, her voice rising above the ambient noise of the restaurant. "Get a life," she said, loud enough that tables nearby turned to look. "Stop clinging to successful people and pretending like you understand how real business works." The silence that followed was deafening. Her coworkers stared at their plates, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. The neighboring tables had gone quiet, obviously listening to what had become a public spectacle. And I sat there, feeling the familiar wash of humiliation and anger that came with being Sarah's designated family failure. But something else was happening too. As Sarah continued to rant about my lack of direction and inability to understand real business, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "I mean, I'm working for Meridian Solutions now," she said, gesturing broadly. "That's a real company with real clients and real impact. We're doing digital transformation work for major corporations, not whatever it is Rebecca thinks she's doing in her little home office. Meridian Solutions." The company name hit me like a physical blow, because I knew Meridian Solutions very well. I had been their primary consulting partner for the past 18 months. I had helped them restructure their entire digital framework, trained their senior staff, and personally overseen their most critical client transitions. The promotions Sarah was celebrating, the team she was now managing, the clients she would be working with, all of it existed within systems and structures that I had built. And more than that, I wasn't just their consultant, I was their consulting contractor, which meant that every month Martinez Consulting sent Meridian Solutions an invoice for our services. And every month, Meridian Solutions cut us a check that, by corporate policy, required signatures from all department heads and senior management, including a signature line for external contractors, my signature line. My name was literally on Sarah's paychecks. As this realization dawned on me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years of family gatherings: complete and total clarity, not just about what I was going to do, but about why this moment had been inevitable all along. Sarah's need to diminish me had finally collided with the reality of what I had built, and the collision was going to be spectacular. I looked across the table at my sister, still basking in the admiration of her colleagues, still riding high on her moment of public triumph over her unsuccessful older sister. She had no idea that she was about to discover that her entire professional reality was built on foundations that I had laid. I reached for my phone with steady hands, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Then I looked up at Sarah, who was still holding court, still explaining to her captive audience why some people just couldn't understand real success. "Sarah," I said quietly, my voice cutting through her monologue. "I need to make a quick phone call. Work emergency." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "See what I mean?" she announced to the table, always pretending her little hobby is so important and urgent. I smiled at her then, the kind of smile that I would remember for the rest of my life, because I knew something that she didn't know yet, something that was about to change everything between us forever. I knew exactly who was going to answer my call. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice picked up. "Marcus, hi, it's Rebecca from Martinez Consulting. I'm so sorry to bother you on a Saturday, but I'm actually sitting here with one of your team members, and I wanted to introduce myself properly." I watched Sarah's face as understanding began to dawn, slowly at first, then all at once, like watching someone realize they've been walking toward a cliff in the dark. The conversation was brief, professional, and absolutely devastating. The silence that followed my phone call was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of profound stillness that happens when everyone at a table realizes they've just witnessed something that can't be undone. Sarah's face had gone through a fascinating series of transformations. During my brief conversation with Marcus, her department head, confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, a kind of pale horror that I had never seen before. "That was Marcus Chen," I said calmly, setting my phone down on the table. "Your boss. He was delighted to finally meet the sister of one of his most valued team members. He also wanted me to pass along that he's looking forward to our quarterly review meeting next Thursday." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that everyone could smell but no one could see yet. Sarah's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, while her colleagues exchanged glances that ranged from confused to increasingly uncomfortable. "I don't understand," Sarah finally managed, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. I reached into my purse and pulled out my business card holder, a leather portfolio that had been a gift from my first major client. The cards inside were thick, cream-colored stock with raised lettering. Rebecca Martinez, founder and principal consultant, Martinez Consulting, digital transformation specialists. I placed one card on the table in front of Sarah, then distributed others to her colleagues who were now leaning forward with undisguised curiosity. Martinez Consulting has been Meridian Solutions' primary external partner for digital transformation initiatives since January 2022. I explained in the same calm, professional tone I used in boardroom presentations. We've overseen the implementation of their customer relationship management systems, their internal communication platforms, and their project management infrastructure. The promotion you're celebrating, Sarah, is to head the digital client services team, a team structure that my company designed and helped implement. One of Sarah's colleagues, I think her name was Jennifer, gasped audibly. "Wait, you're the Martinez from Martinez Consulting? We use your frameworks every day. Your customer retention algorithm is literally printed on a poster in our break room." I nodded. I'm glad to hear the team is finding our methodologies helpful. But I was watching Sarah, who was staring at my business card like it might spontaneously combust. Her face had gone through several more color changes, settling finally on a splotchy red that crept up her neck and across her cheeks. "This isn't possible," she whispered. You're not, you work from home in your pajamas." "I work from home in comfortable clothes," I corrected gently. "There's a difference. My home office overlooks the city because I own the penthouse unit in the Meridian Tower downtown. The same building where your office is located, actually. Sometimes I wave at your floor from my balcony." Another colleague, a young man who looked like he might be fresh out of college, was frantically Googling on his phone. "Holy shit," he muttered, then immediately looked embarrassed. Wow, Rebecca, you're listed as one of the city's top 40 under 40 entrepreneurs. Your company revenue last year was, oh my God." Sarah snatched the phone from him, her eyes scanning the screen with increasing desperation. I watched her read about my company's growth, our client list, our industry recognition. I watched her realize that while she'd been earning a solid middle management salary, I'd been building something that generated more revenue in a quarter than she made in a year. "But you never said anything," she whispered, looking up from the phone with something that might have been betrayal in her eyes. "All these years you let us think." "I let you think exactly what you wanted to think," I replied. "Every time you asked about my work, I told you I was helping companies with their systems. Every time you wondered how I could afford nice things, I mentioned careful financial planning. I never lied to you, Sarah. I just didn't correct your assumptions." The table had fallen completely silent except for the ambient noise of other diners and the distant traffic below. Sarah's colleagues were processing this information with various degrees of shock, embarrassment, and what looked like genuine excitement at meeting someone whose work they actually used and respected. Marcus called me back 10 minutes later, just as Sarah was starting to find her voice again. I answered on the second ring, putting the call on speaker with Sarah's permission. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry to interrupt your Saturday." Marcus's voice carried clearly across the table, but I wanted to follow up on our conversation. "Sarah Martinez, she's your sister? What an amazing coincidence. She's been doing fantastic work with the client services integration. I had no idea you two were related." Sarah stared at the phone like it was a snake. "Yes, she's my younger sister," I confirmed. "I'm actually at her promotion celebration right now." "Well, please tell her congratulations from me again," Marcus continued. "And Rebecca, while I have you, I wanted to mention that the board approved the contract extension we discussed. The 18-month renewal with the expanded scope of services. Legal will have the paperwork ready Monday morning." I watched Sarah do the mental math. 18 months of renewed contracts, expanded services. Her job security was literally dependent on my company's continued partnership with Meridian Solutions. After I hung up, the silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Finally, Jennifer cleared her throat. "So, Sarah," she said carefully, "your sister is basically the reason our department has been so successful this year. The digital transformation project that led to all our promotions. That was her company's work." Sarah's response was swift and predictable. "This doesn't make sense," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Rebecca, you're making this up. This is some elaborate joke or coincidence of names or something." It was the reaction I had expected. When someone's entire worldview gets shattered in public, denial is usually the first defense mechanism. I had seen it happen in corporate boardrooms when executives realized their companies were failing. I had seen it happen in family therapy sessions I'd attended with other relatives over the years. The pattern was always the same: deny, minimize, then try to regain control of the narrative. "I can show you the contracts if you'd like," I offered calmly. "They're confidential, but as a Meridian employee, you'd be authorized to review the vendor agreements for your own department." "I don't believe you," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Her colleagues were already pulling out their phones, clearly planning to do their own research the moment they got home. "Sarah," said another coworker, a woman I didn't know, "remember that workshop we did last month on client retention strategies?" The presenter kept referencing the Martinez method for customer lifecycle management. That was your sister's methodology." Sarah's face crumpled slightly. The pieces were coming together too quickly and too publicly for her to maintain her denial. But instead of acknowledgement or apology, her reaction shifted towards something I recognized from our childhood. When Sarah couldn't win an argument with facts, she tried to win it with emotion. "Well, if you're so successful," she said, her voice taking on the sharp edge it got when she felt cornered, "why didn't you ever tell us? Why did you let Mom and Dad worry about you? Why did you let everyone think you were struggling?" These were fair questions, actually. They were also questions that required answers I wasn't sure I was ready to give. in front of an audience of strangers, but Sarah had chosen this setting, had made this moment public, and now we were all going to live with the consequences of that choice. Because, I said slowly, every time I tried to share good news about my business, it got dismissed or minimized, because when I mentioned landing a new client, the conversation immediately shifted to your achievements. Because when I bought my condo, everyone assumed I was in debt, and it was easier to let them assume that than to explain that I'd paid cash. The truth was more complicated than that, but it was a start. And because, I continued, I learned early that our family celebrates your success and worries about my choices, I got tired of having to prove that my unconventional path was valid. It was easier to just let you all think what you wanted to think. Sarah's colleague Jennifer was shaking her head slowly. But Rebecca, your work literally changed our entire industry approach to customer relations. The case study on your Meridian project is required reading in graduate business programs now. I hadn't known that last part, actually. It was gratifying to hear, but also overwhelming in the context of this very public family drama. Mom and Dad need to know about this, Sarah said suddenly, as if she'd just realized the implications extended beyond this brunch table. They've been worried about you for years. They think you're barely making ends meet. What I tell our parents about my career is between me and them, I replied, just like what you tell them about your career is between you and them. But I could see Sarah's wheels turning. She was starting to realize that our family's entire narrative about the two of us was about to undergo a seismic shift. The successful sister and the struggling sister, the responsible one and the dreamer, the example to follow and the cautionary tale. All of that was about to change, and she wasn't sure who she would be in the new story. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was almost anticlimactic. Sarah's colleagues spent the next hour asking me questions about digital transformation strategies, client retention methods, and industry trends. They treated me with the kind of professional respect I was accustomed to receiving in business settings, but had never experienced in a family context. Sarah herself went quiet, occasionally asking practical questions about my business, but mostly just listening as her worldview rearranged itself around this new information. I could see her processing not just the facts of my success, but the implications of what it meant for her identity, her career, and our relationship. By the time we left the restaurant, word had already started spreading through Sarah's professional network. Her phone was buzzing with messages from coworkers who hadn't been at brunch, but had heard through the grapevine that Sarah Martinez from Client Services was the sister of Rebecca Martinez from Martinez Consulting. "This is going to change everything at work," Sarah said as we walked to our cars. It was the first time she'd spoken directly to me in over an hour. "It doesn't have to," I replied. "Your work stands on its own merit. Your promotion was based on your performance, not on any connection to my company. If anything, I was glad to see that someone I care about was working in an environment where my recommendations were being implemented successfully." But we both knew that was only partially true. Sarah's professional life was about to become significantly more complicated. She would now be the sister of the consultant whose methods her department used daily. Every interaction with upper management would carry the subtext of our relationship. Every project success would raise questions about whether she'd had inside information. Every failure would be scrutinized for signs that the family connection had influenced business decisions. The drive home gave me time to think about what had just happened and what it meant for our family going forward. For 5 years, I had maintained a carefully constructed separation between my personal and professional lives. I had told myself it was for everyone's protection, mine and theirs. But sitting in traffic, replaying the morning's events, I began to question whether that protection had actually been worth the cost. Sarah called me that evening. I was working in my home office, reviewing contracts for Monday morning meetings, when her name appeared on my caller ID. "I've been thinking about what happened today," she said without preamble when I answered. And I owe you an apology, several apologies actually." I set down my pen and gave her my full attention. "I was embarrassed," she continued. "Not just today, but for years. I was embarrassed that I didn't know what my own sister did for work. I was embarrassed that I'd been condescending about your choices. And today I was embarrassed that I found out the truth in front of my colleagues instead of from you directly." "Sarah, no, let me finish. I was also angry. I'm still angry, actually. Not about your success. I mean, I'm proud of you, obviously. But about the secrecy. Do you know how many times Mom and Dad have worried about your financial situation? Do you know how many conversations we've had about whether we should offer to help you with rent or groceries or whatever?" I did know, actually. I had overheard several of those conversations over the years. "And I know that's partly on us," she continued. "I know we made assumptions and maybe we didn't ask the right questions or listen to your answers carefully enough. But Rebecca, you let us worry about you when there was no reason to worry." She was right about that. In protecting myself from their potential negative reactions to my success, I had caused a different kind of pain. I had let people who loved me carry unnecessary anxiety about my well-being. "I'm sorry," I said. "You're right. I should have been more direct about what I was building." "Why weren't you?" The question hung between us, carrying the weight of years of family dynamics and assumptions and misunderstandings. "Because," I said slowly, "I was afraid that if you knew how well I was doing, it would change how you saw me. I was afraid it would create competition or resentment or awkwardness. I was afraid that my success would somehow diminish yours, or that you'd think I was showing off, or that family gatherings would become tense with money issues. So instead, you let me think you were struggling. I let you make assumptions that I didn't correct. That's not the same thing, Rebecca." She was right. It wasn't the same thing, but the result had been the same. I had allowed a false narrative to persist because it felt safer than risking the truth. "Also," Sarah said, her voice getting smaller, "I need to apologize for how I talked to you today. What I said about getting a life and clinging to successful people, that was cruel. It was cruel and it was wrong, and it was completely inappropriate, especially in public." "Thank you," I said. "That did hurt. I was performing," she admitted. "I was showing off for my coworkers, trying to position myself as the successful sister who had it all figured out. I was using you as a prop in my own story about professional achievement." This was the most honest conversation Sarah and I had had in years, possibly ever. "The thing is," she continued, "I think I knew on some level that you were doing better than you let on. Your clothes, your apartment, the way you never seemed stressed about money. but I didn't want to ask because, I don't know, because it was easier to maintain the story where I was the successful one and you were the one who needed guidance. And now I have to figure out who I am in a story where my older sister is more successful than I ever imagined, and where my professional achievements exist partly because of systems she created. That was the crux of it, really. Our entire sibling dynamic had been built on a foundation of false assumptions about our relative success and life satisfaction. Now that foundation had cracked, and we both had to figure out how to rebuild our relationship on more honest ground. The next few weeks brought changes that rippled through our family system in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sarah, to her credit, took the revelation better than I had expected. Instead of becoming resentful or competitive, she seemed genuinely interested in understanding my business and learning about my professional experiences. She started asking thoughtful questions about entrepreneurship, about managing client relationships, about the challenges of building a company from scratch. Our phone conversations, which had previously centered around her work updates and my vague responses about keeping busy, became actual exchanges of professional insights and experiences. But the real transformation happened in our family dynamics. Sarah took the initiative to tell our parents about my business herself, framing it as exciting news rather than a revelation of deception. She called them on a Sunday evening and spent over an hour explaining what Martinez Consulting did, what kinds of companies I worked with, and how successful the business had become. The conversation with Mom and Dad was emotional in ways I hadn't expected. Mom cried, partly from relief that I was financially secure, partly from pride in what I had accomplished, and partly from frustration that she had spent years worrying unnecessarily. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, echoing Sarah's question from the week before. I gave her the same honest answer I had given Sarah. Because I was afraid it would change our relationship, and because every time I tried to share professional good news, the conversation seemed to shift to other topics. Dad's response was more pragmatic. "We could have been celebrating your success instead of worrying about your stability," he said. "That's 5 years of missed opportunities to be proud parents." That hit me harder than I had expected. In protecting myself from potential family drama, I had deprived my parents of the chance to celebrate their daughter's achievements. I had stolen their bragging rights, their opportunity to share good news with friends and extended family, their natural parental pride in seeing their child succeed. The shift in family gatherings was immediate and profound. Suddenly, I was the one being asked about business developments and industry trends. Relatives who had previously treated me with gentle concern now wanted to know if I was hiring, if I could offer career advice to their children, if I would speak at local business events. It was gratifying, but it was also overwhelming. I had gone from being the family's cautionary tale to being its unexpected success story, and the adjustment was more difficult than I had anticipated. Sarah handled this transition with remarkable grace. Instead of seeming diminished by the revelation of my success, she seemed energized by it. She started talking about my achievements with genuine pride, introducing me to her friends as my sister, the entrepreneur, and asking if she could attend some of my speaking engagements. "I want to understand what you built," she told me one evening over dinner. "Not just as your sister, but as a professional who works in this space." I think I can be better at my job if I understand the broader context of what our company is trying to accomplish. This was a side of Sarah I had never seen before. Curious, thoughtful, genuinely interested in learning, rather than just being acknowledged. It made me wonder what our relationship might have been like all these years if we had been more honest with each other from the beginning. The professional implications took longer to sort out. Sarah's position at Meridian Solutions became more complex once her connection to Martinez Consulting became known throughout the company. Marcus, her department head, handled it with typical corporate pragmatism. "It's not a conflict of interest," he explained to Sarah during a meeting that she told me about later. "Your sister's company was contracted with us long before you joined the team, and your role doesn't involve vendor management or contract negotiations. If anything, it's helpful to have someone on staff who understands the methodologies we're implementing." But Sarah was still navigating the subtle dynamics of being known as the consultant's sister in an office that used my company's frameworks daily. Some colleagues seemed to assume she had inside knowledge about upcoming changes. Others questioned whether her promotion had been influenced by the family connection, despite the timeline making that impossible. "It's weird," Sarah told me, "being associated with someone whose work I respect professionally, but who I never really understood personally." That comment stayed with me for days. It crystallized something I had been thinking about since the brunch revelation. Sarah and I had never really known each other as adults. We had known each other as the roles we played in our family system, the successful sister and the struggling sister. But we had never taken the time to understand each other as individuals with our own goals, challenges, and achievements. The success camouflage I had maintained for so long hadn't just hidden my professional accomplishments, it had hidden me. Sarah's reaction to my achievements wasn't just about discovering my business success. It was about discovering that I was a different person than she had thought I was. 6 months after the brunch incident, Sarah and I were having lunch at the same restaurant where everything had changed. But this time we were alone, and the conversation was entirely different. "I've been thinking about what success means," Sarah said, stirring her salad thoughtfully. "Before all this happened, I measured my success by how it compared to what I thought your success was. I was the responsible sister, the one with the steady job and the clear career path and the family approval. And now I'm measuring my success by what I'm actually accomplishing, not by how it stacks up against anyone else's achievements. It's strange, but I think I'm actually more motivated at work now that I know you're successful too. Like we're both winning instead of just one of us." This was a revelation that surprised me. I had always assumed that Sarah's competitive attitude toward me was innate, but it turned out to be more situational than I had realized. When she thought she was competing with someone she saw as failing, the competition felt hollow. When she realized she was part of a family where multiple people could succeed simultaneously, the dynamic shifted entirely. "I've learned something too," I told her. "I thought keeping my success private was protecting our relationship, but it was actually preventing us from having a real relationship. I was so afraid of changing the dynamic between us that I never gave us the chance to see what a different dynamic might look like." Sarah smiled. "And what does this dynamic look like?" I looked around the restaurant, thinking about how different this conversation was from our last one here. It looks like two successful women who happen to be sisters, supporting each other's achievements instead of competing for a limited amount of family pride. "I like that version better," Sarah said. "Me too." The transformation wasn't complete, and it wasn't always smooth. We still had moments of falling back into old patterns, still had to consciously work against years of established family roles. But the foundation was different now, built on truth instead of assumptions, on mutual respect instead of protective deception. 3 months later, Sarah asked if she could bring her boyfriend to one of my speaking engagements at the local Chamber of Commerce. "I want him to see what you do," she explained. "I want him to understand why I'm proud of my sister." Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience of local business leaders and entrepreneurs, I spotted Sarah in the 3rd row. She was taking notes, asking thoughtful questions during the Q&A, and introducing me to people afterward with unmistakable pride in her voice. It was the first time in my adult life that I felt like Sarah and I were genuinely on the same team, not competing for the same resources or recognition, not performing different versions of success for the same audience, but actually supporting each other's goals and celebrating each other's achievements. The woman who had told me to get a life 6 months earlier was now one of my biggest professional advocates. The sister who had mocked my entrepreneurial dreams was now asking detailed questions about scaling business operations and customer retention strategies. But more than that, she had become someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with, someone whose opinions I valued, someone I could see building a real adult sibling relationship with, based on who we actually were, rather than who our family dynamics had trained us to be. The truth, it turned out, was more powerful than any revenge I could have planned. And the relationship we built on that truth was more satisfying than any point I could have scored in that original moment of humiliation. Sometimes the best response to mockery isn't retaliation. It's simply revealing who you really are and giving the people you love the chance to see you clearly for the first time.